Transformation by the Polish poet Anna Kamienska. Anna Kamienska was a teacher in underground schools during the Nazi occupation of Poland. And she wrote not only many stories for children, she wrote Bible commentaries along what we might call progressive lines. This is her poem. To be transformed, to turn yourself inside out like a glove, to spin like a planet, to thread yourself through yourself so that each day penetrates each night, so that each word runs to the other side of truth, so that each verse comes out of itself, gives off its own light, so that each face leaning on a hand sweats into the skin of the palm, so that this pen changes into pure silence. I wanted to say, into love, to fall off your horse, to smear your face with dust, to be blinded, to lift yourself and allow yourself to be led, like blind Saul, to Damascus. In that last verse, she's referencing the story, the famous story of Saul. What was his Jewish name? Paul was his Roman name, of the man who would become considered another apostle of Jesus of Nazareth. But before this happened, he was in fact someone who persecuted, arrested, and sometimes even killed followers of the Jesus movement, or followers of the way, as it was described. And so he was on assignment to Syria, to Damascus, and he had companions with him, and he was on his way to arrest folks who belonged to the movement there, when suddenly he was thrown off his horse and fell, as she describes, into the dust, and what appeared to him was a vision of blinding light, which in fact took his sight. And he saw a vision of the face of Jesus, and the face of the vision asked him, "Why do you persecute me?" And Saul came to his knees and asked, "What should I do?" And the vision said, "You should continue to Damascus, and there you will be told what to do." So he continued to Damascus. He obviously couldn't go by himself. He couldn't see, so he allowed himself to be guided, and was guided to the people who would give him instruction and the opportunity to live this life of his that had been, in that moment, transformed. And he would become the person some would call the greatest apostle of the Jesus movement. But the story is a classic story of transformation. It tells of that time when something happens, and we experience an experience that is so profound, even though it may be a simple experience, but experience that's so profound that we get disoriented, what Soren Kierkegaard called becoming undone. And in that moment, things change. We don't know how, we don't know why, it doesn't really matter how or why, but something changes, and for those of us who have experienced this, as I did, the old lens, the old way of seeing things doesn't work anymore. There needs to be a new way philosopher and theologian Soren Kierkegaard was writing his multiple, he wrote about all kinds of things. He wrote comedy, he wrote satire, he wrote philosophy, he wrote theology. But right around the time that Henry was finding the box in which to have himself mailed to freedom. And Kierkegaard talked about being undone. He wrote about how the religious experience, the experience of being part of a community of faith required us to become undone so that we could see things, ourselves and the world, in a new way. I don't know about you, but I will do almost anything to avoid that. It's especially in times that are considered challenging, although life is pretty challenging most of the time. Thank you very much. To be disoriented, to feel like the ground isn't steady under your feet and you have to be guided because you don't know what's next. You don't know. Nobody's ever ready to fall off their horse and go blind. It happens or it doesn't happen. I want to tell you a story of someone a story of a time when I had the opportunity to watch someone else have this experience. And it moved my heart very deeply. It was quite a few years ago, not long after Michelle Alexander's book came out on mass incarceration. And we were having a community meeting in the church where I served at the time, and it represented the community, so there were many white folks, there were many folks of color who had come to talk about this. And at one point during the meeting, an elderly white woman, woman of color stood up, and I think she described herself as being in her 80s, but she stood up and she said, I was a school teacher all of my life. And when they talked about the war on drugs, I thought it would be a really good thing, and I supported it. And I could see that drugs were causing tremendous amounts of pain in my community, and so I said, yeah, lock them up. Make this stop. I was complicit, she said. And now I know that it was just another strategy to perpetuate apartheid, and perpetuate and destroy Black and brown families. And now I will do everything I can to change that. But I'll never forget that I was complicit. And her courage and her clarity was an example to me of how we can be when we see the truth and all of a sudden we're willing to change and we're willing to do something different. For me and for many millions of others, it was the moment of clarity. The morning after I had driven home in a blackout and realized that without a second thought, I might have taken a life with my car. Because I was in the grip of addiction that has killed much of my family. And I thought it was that kind of experience. I don't know what to do. All the things that have worked for me in my life don't work right now. And if I've told you this story, please forgive me. Or you can tell me later and I promise not to tell it again. But when I picked up the phone, I was shaking because, believe me, my physical health at the moment was not, it was terrible. Even I called Alcoholics Anonymous, and a voice, some male voice, it sounded like it was, I was 31, so it was a long time ago. And he just said, I'm so glad you called. you know, you never have to feel this way again. And for some reason, I believed him. That somebody would be kind to me, would be loving to me in my moment of really painful vulnerability, was something I never expected, and it happened. I describe this experience from different perspectives, because without it, well, we all have it in different ways. For some of us, it's the illness of someone we love, or someone, it can come in many ways, but if we're lucky, it will bring us to our knees, and it will bring us to that new way of life. A life of service and clarity and honesty, humility. Robin Meyers has been a pastor in Oklahoma for, I think at this point, 35 years. A liberal Lutheran pastor in Oklahoma. He describes his ministry as a ministry that is surrounded by folks who think very differently than he does. And he's the one who asks this pesky question. The church dead? Long live the church. Now, he's not shy about answering it. He will say, absolutely, the church is dead. I'm going to leave it to you to answer that for yourselves. But the reason he says that is because the church, like the woman I watched confess in that sanctuary years ago, the church has in many ways, and I say the church writ large, not Unitarian Universalism or Christianity, but just the Western church, I'll put it that way. The dominant church in Western society has became complicit in the 4th century when Constantine turned it into the state religion, which was great because it stopped persecutions, but in all other ways, it made the church complicit. So that instead of resisting empire and finding a place of reality to take care of one another in the face of the brutality of empire, we became the allies of empire. And statistics show, for example, that Christians in the United States are far more ready to enact executions as punishment for crimes than the general population, are far more ready to disclaim climate change and to say it is a hoax. I mean, I'm not kidding when I say that the church, it can happen slowly without our awareness. Meyers saves most of his criticism for people like me. Because people like me who occupy pulpits, some of them high up in a lofty place and some of them down on the ground, but people like me who occupy these pulpits, which is a tender place of trust and responsibility, and is sometimes a weight that is very hard to live up to. Because we lie. We don't tell the truth we know. We're afraid. We're afraid that something will happen to us. We're afraid that we will be rejected, or that there will be, instead of resistance against empire, there will be resistance against the person in the pulpit. I went to preach at a friend's church, I don't know, probably 10, 12 years ago, and I said, this is what I'd like to preach about. And his friend said, no, you can't do that. They're not ready for that message. I've heard that many times from colleagues. They're just not ready to do anti-racism. They're just not ready to talk about this or white supremacy culture, or they're not ready to become a green sanctuary, or whatever it is. And I think to myself, what arrogance What arrogance do I have to have in order to make the decision for you that I'm not going to tell the truth because you might not like it, or I'm going to assume that. And that happens. As I said earlier, no one's ever ready to fall off a horse and go blind. Fortunately for Paul, as he tells the story, the blindness was fairly short. He found a new way of life. Reinhold Niebuhr, a famous liberal theologian of the Protestant theologian of the 20th century, stole the words, I have to say this because St. Patrick's Day is coming up, of a fictional Irish bartender called Mr. Dooley, when he said, the job of the church is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. You ever heard that? It's good. Mr. Dooley, the bartender, said the same phrase, except he said the job of newspapers. So there we are, like our predecessors, preaching with the newspaper in one hand and and a gun in the other. It's the job of the church writ large to create the ground of transformation, to create a safe place for us to explore the things that are hard to explore. Nobody else can make that happen. Meyers, I'll put his book on Slack, or I'll write it somewhere so you guys are interested. I mean, he's written many books, but he says creeds never transformed anybody, right? The vision of Jesus did not say to Saul, you must believe that I am the only begotten Son of God. The vision said, this is what you must do. You must trust and listen to instructions. Myers asked one of his congregants one time, here, look at the Nicene Creed. Where is the life of Jesus of Nazareth? And the congregant said, it's not here. Now, I'm not telling you all to convert. You know that, right? I'm not telling you all to convert. As the dominant force for religion in this country for hundreds of years, it's worth examining what the truth is. So resisting empire. Last week we talked about the many ways to resist, the many ways to embody, to do the work of social justice. The first step is to allow for there to be space somewhere in your heart, in your head, in your schedule, in your way of looking at the world. Allow for there to be space for you to hear or see or experience something that is outside your bubble. And it could be anything. But if there is no space, if that hamster wheel is going so fast and so consistently, it won't happen. So the first thing is to make space and then think, all right, now I'm going to ask you right now to give you a moment to think. Maybe it's not enough, but think for a moment. What can I do today to resist empire? And I'm going to call the United States an empire. In United States history, do you know that 93% of our time we've been at war? 93%, probably more. 7% of our nation's history when we have not been at war. We are an empire as addicted to state-sponsored violence as any empire that has ever existed. We don't even talk about peace anymore. Remember when we talked about peace? I'm going to go off on that tangent. So how might you resist today? I'll grab the microphone in case anybody wants to say anything. Anybody have any ideas? Perhaps if you hear a joke or a comment that implies contempt or hatred for someone of a different race, you might interrupt that. You might read a poem. Meyers calls television the foot soldier of empire, which it is, right? It creates our problems, and then it solves them for us at a great cost to us and a great profit to empire. And then it creates a whole alternate reality where our hates and our worst impulses are consistently encouraged. So I don't know. Maybe turn off the TV sometime. I'm not being flippant. It's real. What could you do today to resist empire? In yourself. Is there something you could read? Is there a conversation you can have? Can you call someone you've had a disagreement with and just say, hello, I love you? I don't know. And I'm not trying to be obnoxious. Just think sometimes the questions that matter in our life as a community are not the questions about, what color should we change the carpet to, but how are we ready? Empire is on track to potentially become significantly more a matter of life and death for more of us. Amen, dear ones. A shame and blessed be.